Well, top of the morning, my party people, and guess what? We are in a brand new country, and dare I say, dobre utra, because we are actually back in the Russian-speaking world. At the same time, I should probably learn a few words of Romanian while I'm here, because we are likewise in the Romanian-speaking world. We are actually in the Republic of Moldova, a country that is multilingual, multi-ethnic, and actually is having a little bit of a battle for its soul at the moment. Not really dissimilar to Ukraine, and Ukraine is frankly not that far from here at all. We're not going to visit on this particular trip, but nonetheless a very important country because part of its population is looking towards the West, the European Union and NATO, and the other part looking towards Russia. So join me in these mean streets. Doesn't actually look that mean at all, but join me throughout Chisinau, also known as Chisinau, this incredible capital, I think, that's what they tell me, of about 500,000 people. Yo, I swear to God, it's been 2.5 minutes since leaving the hotel, and I feel as if, and I promise I didn't plan it this way, we have already discovered the first of the Leninist landmarks. I think. I hope. Could it be? I mean, let's get a little bit closer, but over here it says something along the lines of, and I don't speak Romanian, but fortunately it's in the Latin script and not the Cyrillic, Komsomol, which was the Young Communist League, and then very clearly Leninist. So, has this been maintained? Well, from Leninist landmarks to Marxist mosaics, do I have to say it? Soviet, so be it. Welcome to Moldova. You know, it's unfortunate, but often when you see something like this, and I don't mean literally looking like this, but you know, something that looks like it's probably from a bygone era, has a lot of graffiti around the side, looks quite dilapidated, it's usually something quintessentially Soviet. And it certainly looks that way, but what exactly we're looking at, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. But yeah, definitely something from a bygone era. Let's see if I can get through a little bit of Moldovan history with you. And actually, Moldova has historically been known as Moldavia, and also this particular area where Moldova today sits has also been known as Bessarabia. Now, Moldova has a long tradition and history of statehood or quasi-statehood, so I won't necessarily get into all of that, but I think it's important to start in the year 1812, because in 1812, actually Bessarabia is taken over by the Russian Empire, and Chisinau becomes a very prominent, important city within the Russian Empire. Now, what ends up happening is more than 100 years later, with the events of the Russian Revolution in 1917, this of course gives a big sort of impetus to all of the national minorities and, you know, nations that had been basically living in this prison house of nations of the Russian Empire. So here, actually something is created called the Moldavian Democratic Republic. It actually separates from Russia and joins the Kingdom of Romania. Now, this basically lasts until the year 1940. Now, in 1924, something that I should mention as well is that something known as the Moldavian Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic is created within a small part of Ukrainian territory. It's a way for the Bolsheviks or the communists to basically also, you know, basically promote this Moldavian identity and the struggle for socialism. But actually, Moldova as a whole, you could say, is under Romanian control. 1940, the Soviet Union actually moves in and they take the territory known as Bessarabia, which in a sense broadly corresponds to the Moldova of today. And that is actually taken, 2/3 of it is then fused with about 40% of that previous Moldovan Ukrainian entity, and it forms the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic. Around 1/3 of Bessarabia is then transferred to Ukraine, where it basically still remains today. Well, there's a lot of reminders around Chisinau of how the current authorities are in a bit of a rush to join the European Union. You know, so the idea coming to Chisinau was, let me find a classic Soviet hotel to stay in. And unfortunately, the National Hotel has been long gone. I mean, it's there, but kind of unclear what's actually happening with it. So because of this, I am forced to rely on bourgeois accommodation. Good Lord. Well, there's another Soviet relic, and actually this is the hotel that I really wanted to stay in. And I thought I had a good chance. And then I realized this hotel, like the National, closed about, what, maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years back. And actually quite a shame, because you can tell, I mean, just from looking at the exterior, that this is a very Soviet building. So in the summer of 1941, Romanian fascist forces will reoccupy Bessarabia. And actually they come here, of course, to Chisinau as its capital. And the thing is, when they do, this, of course, spells tragedy for the Jewish population, and the Jewish population was enormous. I mean, it had numbered something like 40% of the city's inhabitants at the time the Second World War started. So you had tens of thousands who were killed in the streets. You also had a lot of Jews who ended up, fortunately, being able to flee. But then also in July of 1941, you had the establishment of the Chisinau ghetto, where something like 11,000 Jews were basically walled in. And I think it's interesting because, of course, many of us will probably know about the Warsaw Ghetto and other such ghettos across Eastern Europe. But of course it makes sense. I mean, Chisinau had been such a prominent place for the Jewish masses basically in the old Russian Empire, and its history basically continued. So basically this memorial here pays tribute to the victims of the Chisinau ghetto, and that's effectively where we are standing today. Soviet trolleybus, where are you taking me? Absolutely nowhere, because we are actually doing this whole journey on foot. And let's be careful, by the way, because no lack of potholes around here. Nearly busted my head about a half dozen times already, and it's not even noon. And here we have, again, the flags of the European Union, which Moldova is not yet a part of. And I was tempted to say the Romanian flag, because actually the Moldovan, or Republic of Moldova's flag, and that of Romania are very similar. Oof. So just making our way through, or down and back up, what's known as the Cascade Stairs, which is pretty surprising in terms of just how immaculately beautiful it is. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of the Potemkin Stairs in Odessa in Ukraine, which I guess is not really surprising because Ukraine is, like I said, right next door. It's actually very close, and Odessa in particular, right around the corner more or less. Hello. Have a double espresso?
33.
Well, salute. Third coffee of the day. I'm not sure if I told you this. I don't think I did, but I actually got off of a 24-hour bus journey yesterday, literally 24 hours in one go, from Prague to Chisinau. If you were thinking about doing that, never in your fucking life do that. It was absolutely horrific. There was not even a toilet on that bus. Had to contort in all types of mysterious ways. But anyway, my body is hurting today. My mind is a little bit foggy. Mind? Did I say mind? Yeah. Anyway, coffee galore. Fortunately, that's one of the big draws, apparently, of life here in Chisinau. They love their caffeine, as do I. Perhaps for your next holiday, you should forego Cancun, Malaga, or any of the other holiday destinations with beaches and come here to beautiful sandy Chisinau. Wow. Alright, I didn't want to admit this, but we've been lost for about an hour. And the thing is, we are of course in pursuit of all of those Leninist landmarks, and they made this one extremely difficult to find. But thank heavens, thank Marxian heavens, we have actually made it, and I'll show you in just a second. Check this shit out. Coming up to my boy. Oh, wow. Vladimir Lenin for the motherfucking win. There he is. And what a Marxist magician we have on this side. And check it out, over here we actually have the seal of the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic. Man, oh man, oh man. And right next to it, a rather refurbished, in fact they're working on it now, pretty new looking building, but this is definitely a retro Soviet piece of art. I think it's worthy of returning to the story of Jewish Chisinau. Now, the thing is, look, actually it's Chisinau in Romanian or Moldovan, it's Chisinau in Russian, but also Kishinev, I believe, in Yiddish. And, you know, this was really a part of historic Yiddish land, you know, of this huge community of Jewish masses living all over Eastern Europe and the old Russian Empire. There was something, however, I should point out, which is that there was a place called the Pale of Settlement. It's basically the territory within Russia where Jews were actually allowed to live. They weren't allowed to live many places, but actually all of present-day Moldova was basically fair game. And Chisinau, as a kind of growing city, was a very popular destination for Jews to actually move to. So by 1897, Chisinau was almost half Jewish. I think it was like 48%, something like that. So anyway, what's interesting is that in 1903, there was a very significant pogrom or violent anti-Semitic attack, or set of attacks, I guess you can say, that happened here in Chisinau. And actually, as a result, 49 Jews lost their lives. And actually in 1905, there was another pogrom in which 19 Jews lost their lives. Well, I guess it's time to test the old endurance. And I'm not exactly sure how many steps we have here, but let's see if we can get to the top without being out of breath. I think I'll turn off the camera before that point. But anyway, you know, I'm going to be 40 years old this year, so still reasonably fit in my 30s. Yeah, let's see what happens. All right, I'm going to keep it real with you. Made it to the top, only slightly out of breath. And my verdict is, I would never do this shit again. No, definitely beautiful. And check out the view from up here. Suppose that makes it all worth the while. Man, you know, it's always a very sobering experience coming to one of the Eternal Flames or the Victory Parks, and this is definitely no exception. It is really spectacular in its own right. But yeah, basically I think if you look at the history of Moldova and contrast it to that of the former Soviet republics in Central Asia, you know, we were just in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, very different. Because actually those republics were always an integral part of the USSR, really of the entire Soviet experience from the beginning. And here in Moldova, it was very different. I mean, Moldova only became part of the USSR in 1940. And then it had yet less than a year, basically, where it was part of the USSR before the territory was once again incorporated, occupied by Romania, fascist Romania at that time. So already in 1940 and 1941, because a lot of the sentiments of people here who were ethnically Romanian, or you could say Moldovan, you know, leaned towards Romania, a lot of people were deported. They were deported to Kazakhstan, deported to the territory of Siberia, and basically that continued also after the war. But nonetheless, already in 1941, this meant that there were people here, quite a lot of them, who were actually supportive of Romania taking back, you could say, this territory. Now, basically in 1944, you have the liberation of Chisinau and the liberation of Bessarabia, Moldova, from the fascist invaders. So once again, it becomes part of the Soviet Union. The Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic is basically re-proclaimed. And then after this, you also have the deportations of those who collaborated, but not just collaborated. It has to be said that there were a lot of people, innocent people, swept up also in the deportations, killed en route, things like this. But anyway, all of that to say that I think the sentiments in this country still quite divided, you know, speaks to the fact that, again, you know, this was an entity, this was a country, this was a territory sort of between two worlds, and it still remains that way today. Well, coming from the old East Berlin, this type of facade right here looks too familiar. So this, I would have to say, almost definitively, certainly, stake my life on it, has been unchanged since Soviet times. Well, here we are, the Military Museum. And it looks like you can just walk in. I was expecting this to be all inside, but it looks like it's all maybe outside. Program, so you're supposed to give 10 lei, maybe 40 lei. Either way, that's basically nothing. Got pieces of military hardware basically everywhere. Woof. descriptions, I suppose, somewhere about what they are. This must cover a lot of periods, but I would expect most of it actually covers the history of Soviet Moldova. Look, we even have a MiG-21 from 1959. Man, what a massive, massive monster. Yeah, so mostly Soviet hardware from the 1950s, and pretty interesting because it's just open to the public. I mean, all right, it said that it was, I think, 40 lei entrance, which is like $2, maybe less, but didn't see any place to actually pay for it, so sorry, Moldova. And over here, actually, we have the old press building of the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic, now presumably taken over by Eminem? Not exactly. Alright, I'm gonna put my money on the fact that what we're looking at here is part of Soviet heritage, part of Soviet history, presumably dealing with sports. And if there's one thing the Soviets excelled at, both on a professional international level and in their private lives, it was definitely sports. Well, the Opera and Ballet House here in central Chisinau. Now, I guess one thing that's important to sort of grasp is the fact that Moldova in 1940 was a very, very underdeveloped region. And yeah, it still remains the poorest country in Europe, but nonetheless, it achieved pretty tremendous successes with Soviet power and Soviet rule. Namely, literacy. I mean, it was a largely illiterate country beforehand, and basically that changed very, very quickly. But also access to arts and culture, and this basically drives that point home. You know, so one of the things that I find quite fascinating and quite important to understand about Moldova is the fact that neutrality is actually enshrined in this country's constitution. Now, I think that makes a whole lot of sense because, again, you have a country which is quite divided. You know, a multilingual, multi-ethnic state, and actually part of the population looks towards the West and towards further integration with Europe, and part of the country looks towards maintaining or even deepening cooperation with Russia. Now, the thing is, in light of the events in Ukraine since 2022, there's been calls among some Moldovans anyway toward eventually joining NATO. Now, the current government hasn't actually said explicitly that that's what they want to do, but they have said things that have sort of hinted at the possibility of this in the future. And proponents would say that's going to be absolutely necessary to stave off a possible Russian intervention. Opponents would actually say it's precisely because Ukraine basically gave up its neutral status and started moving towards NATO that we're in this mess to begin with. So one thing I've been told is essential to try here is a little something known as a plinta, I believe. Should be right over here. Una plinta brasa de vaca? Just found ourselves a little kind of quaint park-esque thing. I don't know exactly if this is a park, but a place where we can maybe chill and have our plinta right here. So it looks very crispy, a little bit like a börek actually, and I have actually seen börek around for sale, and I guess not surprising considering that Chisinau used to be part of the old Ottoman Empire, so the old Turkish influence. But nonetheless, let's try this and see what it has to offer. Very, no disrespect to Moldova, very börek-esque. Not sure if I can actually spot the difference, but beautiful. And even the Hotel Chisinau is dying to become part of the European Union, seeing more of those stars here than in Germany. You know, so there's quite some debate and controversy about whether Moldovans constitute a distinct nation or whether Moldovans are actually Romanians. And actually this debate really came to a head during the period where the Soviet Union existed, as did socialist Romania. Technically fraternal countries, but with very different outlooks on this question. Now basically Nicolae Ceausescu, the longtime leader of socialist Romania, who died a very unceremonious death in 1989, used to basically say that Moldovans were effectively Romanian. And actually what was interesting is that in 1976, Ceausescu pays a state visit to the Moldavian SSR. And actually in the aftermath of this, the Soviet leader Brezhnev had said to him very famously, so you had an opportunity to see that there's a distinct, Moldavian people and culture and language and all of this. And Ceausescu was said to have responded by saying, well, yes, I did, except they spoke to me in Romanian. In other words, there was no distinctive Moldovan language. They used the Cyrillic script, and on the basis of this, the Soviets tried to basically say that this was a distinct language. That question has largely been settled today. Basically, the language is, there's no differences between the two, and nowadays people here would largely say we speak Romanian. The question of whether there's two distinct nations, however, is still something which is ongoing. There's actually a significant movement within Moldova today of people who want unification actually with Romania to become part of a greater Romanian state, I guess you could say, and actually those who advocate what's known as Moldovanism. In other words, that there is actually a distinct nation, even if there's a shared sort of history and culture and things of this sort. Well, check it out inside of the central bus station. A throwback. Well, my lovely people, as the old saying goes, all good things must inevitably come to their conclusion. However, we're not quite leaving Moldova. Here's the thing. There's actually two entities within the Moldova of today. There's the Republic of Moldova, which actually claims all of its territory. And then there's a little something known as the Transnistrian Moldavian Republic, or PMR, often referred to in English as Transnistria. And Transnistria is not recognized by any country in the world except for two, you could say, also breakaway Soviet republics, South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And actually the Council of Europe says that Transnistria is de facto under Russian occupation. Now basically its creation is a consequence of the fragmentation of the USSR in 1990, 1991, and actually, well, that part of Moldova is predominantly ethnic Russian. And as a consequence of this, they wanted closer relations with Russia to basically continue, whereas people here largely, although not exclusively, leaned more towards Romania and the West. Anyway, we're going to dive into that story once we actually get over to Tiraspol, so join me on that side of the de facto border.